Well, greetings. I am delighted to have Geoff Balloti, the CEO of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, on our show today. Geoff is a well-respected industry leader. He was the chairman of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, as well as the U.S. Travel Association. He's won many industry awards and accolades. I've been a big fan and admirer for a long time. Most people know Geoff was the president of Starwood Hotels North America, CEO of Wyndham Destination Network, president and CEO of Wyndham Hotel Group, and now the president and CEO of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. But some people may not know that Geoff actually started out as a dishwasher. Now, first of all, Geoff, welcome to the show. And can you also share with us how you built your successful career? And looking back, what were some of the inflection points that contributed to your success?
It's because of mentors like you, David. You have been such a mentor to me since the 1980s. David and I were talking earlier about just how much I miss seeing David in my weekly travels the way I did for years. During his Omni years, for all those years, his Hilton years, his Hyatt years, I think you were there for over 20 years, and Best Western, of course, for the last 20. And I must say, you look amazing for 90 years old today, David. But no, seriously, you've inspired me as chairman of the American Hotel and Lodging Association to serve and made me think a lot about what's important when it comes to, as you're doing now, giving back to our industry. But yes, my first job in this industry was as a dishwasher at a hotel in Boston back in the late 70s. I think you started as a busboy. Is that?
Yeah, as a dishwasher and then a busboy. I got promoted.
Yeah, no, I always wanted, like you did, when you're a dishwasher, what do you want to be promoted to? You want to be promoted to a busboy. That's all I wanted back then. You remember the busboys dropping off the dirty dishes, and you would say, "Why can't I be a busboy?" And boy, it took me a while. It did not happen that first summer, but it did the second summer. I was promoted to busboy. And then when you're a busboy, what do you want to be, David? What's the next thing?
A waiter.
Yeah, that's where all the money is made. You want to be a waiter. And I finally became a waiter. One of my first tables, funny story, that first night, I actually had sit down with me, as luck would have it, not only the general manager, but the vice president of food and beverage from the main headquarters of Le Méridien. This was a Meridian hotel. And he orders a bottle of wine, which, boy, was I nervous. As the cork came out, only half a cork came out. It was a very expensive to leave before I go. And on that, one of those very first nights, I can't remember if it was my first or second, the vice president of food and beverage actually in front of the GM fired me.
Oh God.
I was back in my locker room taking off. We had tuxedos at the time when my general manager, true story, his name was Bernard Lambert. I don't know if you've ever met Bernard.
I've heard of him. I know he's a great mentor to so many people.
Great man. Came back. He was a big teddy bear of a gentleman and gave me a hug, Frenchman. And he said, "Geoff, the vice president is only going to be here until Friday. This was the middle of the week. Take the rest of the week off. You'll still be paid. Come back next week and I will teach you, personally teach you how to open that bottle of wine appropriately," which you've obviously not been trained on. And it was at that moment, David, that I realized that if there was any job in the world, if there was any man, any person, any individual I wanted to be Bernard Lambert. And it was many years before I actually became a general manager. It was dozens of years later, but I always thought about, and I was always in the industry, how great it would be to be a general manager. And I say this to whatever I'm speaking to hospitality students, how great it is, as you've had, as I've been lucky enough to have that operational experience, that credibility out there in the field, whether it was waiting tables or being a busboy or in sales and marketing like yourself, or finally being a general manager. But I say that because this is an industry that is a great industry and that can take you absolutely anywhere. It's tough to get young students out of college today to realize that this could take you anywhere, but this was an industry that took me and my pregnant wife overseas to Milan and then Paris and Brussels, where three of my four daughters were born, back to Rome, Italy, to White Plains, New York. You mentioned Starwood, but I guess, to your question on inflection and what I've learned along the way, I would say, and I say this to my four daughters all the time, to always, no matter where you are in that dish pit, washing dishes, whatever you're doing, to always look on the sunny side of everything and to always try to make that optimism. In my case, one day, maybe becoming a general manager or even a busboy like you were. If you believe it, it could come true. If you think only the best and expect only the best, and you try to forget your mistakes of the past and press on to what's next, that again, it's just an amazing industry, an industry that you and I have spent our entire lives in. And yeah, here I am in Parsippany, New Jersey, with Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, the world's largest franchising company after, I think, Best Western.
Far behind you. That's a great story about Bernard, and goes to show you that when you are down and depressed and full of self-doubt, how a little bit of kindness and compassion goes such a long way.
And I don't know if you realized, but it was many years later. You mentioned Starwood. I was working now for Barry Sternlicht, who wound up buying all of ITT Sheridan, which had me over in Europe, when I was
Right.
on the deal team of buying Le Méridien. And guess who, 20 years after being fired and having him save my job, guess who at that moment was the president and chief executive officer of Le Méridien Hotels?
Bernard?
It was Bernard Lambert. I walked into that room. I knew, of course, what I was walking into. The other things I always say to my daughters is fail to prepare to fail. Prepare for every meeting more than you could possibly imagine. And I'd done a lot of preparation. Walking into just another acquisition meeting, I thought, realizing that I used to work in a hotel that was a Le Méridien hotel, having no idea that Bernard Lambert was the president and CEO. And I knew walking in, there was the same man. He had aged a bit. He had a little bit of gray hair. And he looked at me in a way that was, oh, I know you, but I don't know where I know you from. And we waited until the first break until I had a chance to introduce myself to him. And yeah, just a big mentor of mine. Mentorship is so important. I've stayed in touch with him, still talk to him quite frequently. But he was my first. He wasn't even the general manager at the time. I believe he was the resident manager. Back when we had resident managers, you remember those days when the residents in the hotels? I believe he was living in the Le Méridien, Boston back then.
What a great story. Well, your journey was spectacular, but it's not without some challenges and setbacks. So can you share with us how you eventually prevailed and any lessons that you learned?
Gosh, so many lessons along the way. I had too many setbacks and too many disappointments to even begin to mention. Probably my biggest was really needing that job and being fired. It was a setback, but I bounced back for it and was promoted to busboy a couple of years later. I always try to forget about the setbacks and learn from them and move on. I would say the biggest setback and disappointment, if you will, in my 40 years, which will always stay with me, and I'm sure it will for so many of us in this industry, was certainly the setback that we've all been through with COVID. 2020 was just such a difficult year for all of us. And we all had to make very difficult and very regrettable decisions. For me, the difficult decision, the biggest one I've ever had in my career, was to do what we had to do, saying goodbye to so many unbelievably talented and really beloved team members who, through no fault of their own, we were going through what the industry was going through back in 2020, really downsizing our companies. And we all had to project as leaders confidence and conviction, and most importantly, again, empathy. We talk about the importance of empathy. But I think the most important lesson to your question through that setback that continued to be imparted on me was the need to let people know what they need to know as soon as we knew what we needed to do, versus delaying the inevitable bad news that often happens from a leadership standpoint. I have talked and mentored so many talented friends and executives who found out 6 months or 9 months or 12 months of after having been on unpaid furlough that they had no job later on in 2021 or early 22 to return to. And that uncertainty was just so brutally difficult. I'm sure people that were on furlough faced that. And it's just really made me realize how important communicating as leaders the bad news is sooner rather than later. And again, back to your point, doing it always with empathy.
Yeah, I'm talking about the pandemic and how much uncertainty there was in 2020 and the regrettable, sad decisions that we all had to make. It was certainly the most difficult period in my career, and certainly for you too. And I had such great admiration for you in terms of how you led your organization. You were out there projecting enthusiasm and conviction, and you had to put up this brave front in front of all your stakeholders, and you appeared vulnerable at times, which reflects how genuine a person you are. But you also had just so much courage and grace that you projected throughout. And I'm sure the audience would want to know, how did you find this courage and grace to lead in the face of so much personal and professional difficulties?
I'm surrounded by courageous leaders who I would talk to every day. And the one thing that I think we all realized was just how more connected we were. I know a lot of people think that Zoom doesn't connect us. And boy, we were all crying through Zoom during those days. The leaders that I knew would remain on my team. And the same thing with my chairman, who I've been with now for 15 years, Steve Holmes. He was the guy that hired me. He's still the chairman of this company. And he, along with the rest of the board, were always there to just reinforce that we were doing the right thing. I mean, this was an unprecedented time. The company had to make difficult decisions, but we were always doing them together. With the employees, I think it was important that as we were communicating really early on, I'm talking about, we closed this office on Friday, March 13th. And I believe we were communicating by the end of that month, maybe it was the first week of April, what we were doing. And we weren't dragging it out. We weren't putting people on furlough for 6 or 9 or 12 months. And it was really important that, certainly with all the people that reported directly to me, and as far down as people would take my call, I was calling each and every one of the team members who would take my call to not just talk it through, but more importantly, to talk about what it was that I personally could do to help them. I believe we all have a responsibility when somebody leaves an organization, if they've been with the organization, to really help with our networks, help with our connections, help with our search community. I don't think anybody in the industry, David, knows more when it comes to executive search. And I hear all the time from recruiters out there about the people they want to call and, like you, ask them for recommendations and help, because there's so much opportunity still out there in the industry, as we've seen in terms of it comeback. I'd say the other thing, the really important thing, were that all of the decisions that we were making after, first and foremost, what was happening with our team members, we were always thinking it through with our franchisees and our owners in mind. This office in this room, boardroom, is to my left. That night of Friday, March 13th, that was the night we decided to close the office down. I don't think any of us realized we were closing our offices back in the middle of March of 2020 that we would be closing them for as long as we closed them. I think we all thought we'd be back in a matter of days or weeks or months. But we all agreed that we wouldn't leave that night, as RevPARs were starting to really fall and cities were starting to close down, without getting a note out to our franchisees. We always try to make our decisions through our franchise advisory councils and committees and brand councils, as I'm sure you did at the time with your associations at Best Western. But that night we put out a note to all of our franchisees worldwide that their receivables would not be due for March or April or May, June onward if they could not pay us back. And that was okay, and that they would accrue with no interest penalty, and that we would not be asking them in any way or shape or form for anything in addition, any dropped windows or extensions. And it went a long way in terms of our team showing our franchisees how much we want to help them. And it really began for all of us through the very next day, or I guess that we closed on Friday, March 13th. And it was that Monday that we all figured out and all began to figure out how we were going to continue to support them remotely, unable to travel, in terms of reaching out and talking to our small business owners, these moms and pops, as you were talking about nationwide. You were one of the most out there CEOs I recall in the deepest, darkest depths of this pandemic, talking about what this industry needed to do to help these small business owners persevere in terms of the flexibility and the brand standard relief and the financial relief that we could do. And as you've told, as I've heard you tell over and over again, there are just so many inspirational stories out there of perseverance and hope that you saw, that we saw at our hotels. I think that really answers your question. It's certainly what helped me through it, was watching whenever you thought that we were having a bad day corporately, watching these franchisees and small business owners giving back, who are in much deeper, darker spots financially, and from having empty hotels, back to their communities, back to their poor, back to their homeless, back to their destitute around them. It was really remarkable how this industry pulled together.
Yeah, a very difficult experience, but no doubt shaped all of us. And I love hearing you talk about showing empathy, not just towards your employees, but also towards the franchisees who really gave you the business, and putting yourself in their shoes, being small business owners and pouring your life savings into the business, and through no fault of yours, all of a sudden the business has evaporated, how difficult it must have been. And you talked about the team also, which I think is my experience as well. When there's so much uncertainty, knowing that you can count on your team, it gives you the courage to lead. That's just a remarkable story too. Shifting gears, let's talk about Wyndham's work in ESG and in DI initiatives. It was really heartened to see that just this year, this is only 6 months into the year, you were recognized by Newsweek, Forbes, Diversity Inc., and Human Rights Campaign for your ESG and DI initiatives. Congratulations, Geoff.
No,
Tell
thank you.
us, why is it important for you and Wyndham to pursue these initiatives?
I think it's never been more important. People keep talking about the great resignation, or I think more appropriately, a lot of people are talking about it is for our team members, our employees, the great reassessment. And I think what this pandemic has made clear is that our team members, our employees, desire to be treated better. It's remarkable that 40% of our industry's workers who left their job in the last year are now in flexible roles outside of hospitality. And this really is a new paradigm where our team members, our employees, are looking for, I think, a lot more from their employer. I think all industry team members are looking for a lot more from their employer. They're looking for more flexibility, as we know. They're looking for more meaningful work. We've always expected workers to come to the office 5 days a week. Mental health was rarely ever discussed in the workplace. And that world is gone, as Blackstone's Larry Fink said to all CEOs. I don't know, David, if you had a chance to read his letter. It's a really important letter that he puts out to all of the CEOs that BlackRock owns. We know that companies who forge strong bonds with their team members are seeing lower levels of turnover and higher returns. Our 2021 corporate turnover was actually better than it was back in 2019 by about 100 basis points, which our team is pretty proud of. I think we've all heard stories that there are companies out there who don't necessarily want to adjust to the new reality and believe that everybody should be back in the office 5 days a week. And those companies are beginning to struggle. We all know that turnover drives up expenses, and it certainly drives down productivity. And most importantly, turnover, when we lose a team member, a valued team member with all this institutional knowledge, it erodes our culture. And we think a lot about culture, and it's a culture that was built by our chairman, Steve Holmes. Count on me is what it's all based with in terms of accountability and integrity, and creating an environment of diversity, of equity, and inclusion that really helps us compete for talent. And our environment, we know, in this industry is more complex than ever, and it certainly reaches way beyond the issues of pay and flexibility. And COVID, to your point, has really shown such a bright light on racial equity, on childcare, on things, again, that we never talked about the way we do now, on mental health. And here at Wyndham, we're always trying to be thoughtful about how all of us as leaders use our voice and how we connect on social issues that are important to our team members. We're always trying to be a kinder and a gentler leadership team. Where we touched on it. We've been talking a lot about how we all as leaders need to showcase humility and empathy while obviously staying grounded in our mission and our vision and our purpose for shareholders like BlackRock and all the other folks that count on us to drive results. But we, at the same time, know we have a responsibility to advance and champion diversity and really focus on increasing female leadership. One of the things I'm very proud of is our number of females in our C-suite, folks that report to me, is now 30%, and that was up from 10% pre-COVID. My CFO, my chief marketing officer, my CHRO are all now women, and they weren't a few years back, but I know I've still got another 20% to go. And so there's a lot of things we're proud of. You called out a few of them. What I'm really proud of is receiving a perfect score again. I think this is the fourth year in a row from the Human Rights Campaign's Equality Index, designating Wyndham as the best place to work. And we're going to keep climbing up the Diversity Inc. rankings, and we're going to continue to want to be recognized as a company that is noteworthy and committed to diversity and inclusion.
There's a good reason why Wyndham has received all these accolades and recognition, and certainly you've led by example, formed a very diverse leadership team. Regrettably, some companies are still not getting it, and their leadership team is far from being diverse or inclusive. And there are many reasons why that might be the case. And I was reading a McKinsey report, and it cited some of the reasons. For example, gender biases and stereotyping. And what's your advice on that for the company and for the individuals?
Again, we're always owner first, and we look out across our development community. And one of the things that we always start with is, how do we bring more women to the table? How do we bring more women in? Our Women Own the Room program, which we've been working very hard on and really proud of, is the first ever program by a major hotel company that's specifically designed to target the advancement of women in hotel ownership. What a better place to start to really break through that predominantly male dominated industry, especially when it comes to development. It's pretty incredible to think that of every 10 people entering the development world of building and owning hotels, there are 9 men for every 1 woman, when we have one of the most diverse industries in the world. We look at who's working in our hotels, and we know that 70% in our case out in our hotels at the line level are female. But when you're looking at the ownership, it's completely the other way around. So we're really focused on that program. Women Own the Room is specifically designed to help overcome those barriers. We've put a program together that is helping bring in women, and our teams are all working on guiding them through entrepreneurship, connecting them with other women who are very successful. And I know so many women out there who are incredibly successful in the Asian American community and in the overall industry, who are established female hotel developers. How can we bring these women who have successfully really broken the mold to help others? And we've been able to sign, award, open hotels from Virginia to Florida to Colorado to every week. I'm generally in my travels talking to someone who is either developing or breaking ground on a new Wyndham hotel. And I would love in 10 years from now to have a woman owner say to me that thanks to this program, thanks to Wyndham, I own 5 hotels or 10 hotels or 50 hotels because you folks help give us a start. And I think there's a lot more we could do. Obviously, I say only 30% of my direct reports right now are women. I need to do a better job there. And having owners that are reflective of that 50-50 population out there.
It's such a great program, and I know Wyndham have been widely lauded for it. How does the program actually work?
We're using our balance sheet. We're being more generous, if you will, in terms of what we could provide in terms of incentives with our teams. In terms of, it really begins at the introduction of education in terms of how the development process goes with our teams, all the way to opening in terms of what's required along the way. Obviously, the financing is an important piece of it. We could help there. The operational support and the training is really important. And then the continued ongoing support is what really is the secret sauce, is taking folks that we realize haven't done this before and taking them through with the support of the organization that we have, from ground break to opening, and then operate.
Well, thanks so much for doing this program. You always lead by example, and I applaud you for this very successful program. A lot of companies have similar programs, providing seminars on development or helping with operations and opening, but I can't remember too many people have stepped up and actually provided financing, which is the missing part to this kind of a program. So proud of you and so happy that Wyndham is doing it. Let's talk about some of the other barriers. The other one, which I found interesting, is in some companies, women are just not invited to happy hours or golf outings or different things. So they don't have the same access to the network, and they don't have the same opportunity for exposure and to build rapport and relationships. So if you were an individual that is in that situation, what's your advice to that person?
Yeah, no, it's a really great question. And I had a chance to watch you with my friend, when was that? A few weeks back, Heather McCrory. You folks talked about this very question. It was interesting to see Heather's view. She's been obviously so successful. She's such a great person, such a great leader. And you were talking about how men's assertive behavior in the workplaces is often perceived differently. It's perceived as perhaps strong or commanding or direct, when women who display that same assertiveness are often viewed as aggressive, which I think one of you suggested, which I completely agree with, is completely unfair. I remember you talking about, David, bringing up how unfair it is that women often have the lion's share of household responsibilities, which obviously could limit their ability to pursue leadership positions, which Heather agreed with. I guess my answer, and I have 4 women who are all gainfully employed in the workforce. In fact, I'm surprising my 30-year-old daughter tonight for her birthday. She doesn't know I'm coming. I'm in New Jersey. She's up in Massachusetts. I'm going to go see her later tonight. But whether it's my daughter Kara, who is working, or my daughter Kendall, who's actually in the hotel business, and she's in the development world and surrounded by almost all men. She's an asset manager in a private equity development firm up in Boston. Now, I'm always reminding my daughters to invite themselves. I think that's the easiest thing that women can do. Our chief marketing officer, who you know and who loves you, Lisa Cecchio, is always talking about inviting herself. She has a mantra. I've heard her speak publicly before about bringing a chair into a meeting room when there might not be a chair for her in that meeting room. And I've actually seen her do it. I've seen her bring a chair in, and it's always welcome. I love it if I've forgotten to include my chief marketing officer in a meeting that she should be in, where she brings a chair into that room. And she sits down with her notebook and her pen, and she's teaching herself. It might not be her area of expertise, but and again, to my daughters, I say, trust in your instincts, trust yourself, stretch yourself, and be willing to invite yourself. This might sound crass, but wing it, as I think men so often are, more so than women. Because as I remind my 4 daughters all the time, I believe that women are better listeners. They're certainly more sensitive and more connected to their surroundings. And I think we all need more women as CEOs on these panels that you and I sit on. We don't have enough of them, but it's great that I'm on many a panel today with a Heather McCrory. I'm thinking of my NYU panel. Stephanie Lenartz, I believe I'm up there on stage with. I've been on panels with. I was with Ilda last Thursday or Friday at IRFAC. We're getting there. We're just not getting there quickly enough, and it's a big opportunity for all of us in this industry and in business overall.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. There's so much opportunity to be more inclusive, and you have to be assertive. I love what your daughter might do in that situation. Sounds like a go-getter, just like the dad. Let's talk about finding advocates and mentors. You touch a little bit on it. You talk about how great a mentor Bernard has been to you and how inspirational he has been to you. How important is it to find advocates and mentors if you want to get ahead? And how do you do that?
It's critical, and it is so very important. Yes, Bernard was a great mentor, and I've had so many great mentors along the way. Denise Cole, I don't know if you
Oh
remember
yeah,
Denise. I think
yeah,
you
yeah,
remember Denise. She was
yeah.
one of my toughest bosses, who had the guts to call me into her office one day. And funny story, she said, Geoff, she snuck in. We were having a global conference, and she snuck into the back of the room and watched me present. And I didn't know she was in the room. I was actually working for her. And she called me into her office and said, I have a sense you don't enjoy public speaking. And I said, Denise, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I think I get by. And she looked at me and she said, you think you get by? She said, Geoff, you don't get by, and you need to seek professional help, which was like, wow, that was something that I have forever appreciated, because I did go off and seek professional help. I took a Dale Carnegie class and then got hooked on how important presentation skills training is. But I guess to answer your question, to the junior folks who might be watching this, I would say don't be shy. Find someone that you admire and look up to. As I looked up to Denise, even though I wasn't on her team for very long, I always used her as a mentor, and was lucky enough. When I was sent overseas for 15 years, I came back. She was no longer with the company. I was able to actually hire her back, David, as my chief human resource officer. I used to think, who better to have next to you in a managed world? We were managing, gosh, we had 100,000, 120,000 employees and 700 managed hotels. Who better to have next to you as your chief human resource officer that some of this actually been a GM and a VP and an SVP and a director of ops, when the most important people, as you know, in that environment are your general managers. And she was phenomenal. Many years later, CHRO, and she actually took my job as I was leaving Starwood. But find junior folks, that find folks around you, junior folks, senior folks who you think you trust and admire, and just ask them. And I think people are always surprised how many of us want to help. And I really believe, I say this all the time, again, to my daughters, that asking for help, I believe, David, defines success more than anything else. I think those leaders are out there. I think those of us at junior levels, when we ask a senior level person to help us, they're out there. And those of us that want to help, love to help. And there's a lot of us out there like you, who I know have mentored so many people that I know who would count you as a mentor. I would count you early on as a mentor, looking up to you, as I was much more junior than you were when you were our chairman at the American Hotel and Lodging Association. When was that? Back in 2010, 2011?
2010, yeah.
Yeah, I was a pretty junior person, and you were very senior in my mind. And in any event, I think to the more senior people, I think we all need to mentor more. We need to show more interest and more flexibility to taking on mentorship roles. And we need to all be willing to share our vulnerabilities and our mistakes and our shortcomings and teach along that way. I have a great general counsel who's always talking about being vulnerable with his teams. He's demonstrating that all the time to his teams, and empathy to his teams. Paul Cash, I think you know Paul, and just has very high emotional intelligence. And I think as leaders, we all have that responsibility. But to the more junior people, I'd say look for those folks around you and ask for their help. Don't be shy.
Such great advice. I see that we're running low on time now. I just want to ask you one last question. How taking risk, and can you share your experience in that?
Look, I think taking risks are critical, and it's been very important for me. I took a risk leaving the team of Denise and the great back then Richard Hartman. I loved what I was doing then in North American operation under Denise, but no, I took a risk and I was willing to relocate, and I was lucky to have a wife who was willing to go along with me. Um, but being willing to relocate is, I think, really important. So often I think people get blocked because they want to be promoted when there are opportunities out there that might not immediately be available where they are. Taking those risks, taking that advice, taking that feedback, as I did from Denise when she told me I was a terrible public speaker. Taking a risk, as she suggested I take, to go out there and actually seek becoming a better. Always looking for feedback and looking for opportunities. I think taking risks are really, really important. And yeah.
I totally agree with you. You have to get out of your comfort zone to grow your horizon and broaden your perspectives. I'm afraid we are out of time, but it is so good to visit with you, Geoff. And thank you so much for taking the time and sharing your perspectives and thoughts. And you're so helpful in everything that you said. What sage advice you're giving. And I really appreciate it. Geoff Balloti, the CEO and president of Wyndham Hotels and Resorts, industry leader, and I'm proud to say my good friend. Thank you so much.
I hope I will see you at NYU. I'll see you in New York City.
Yeah, thank you
Can't
so
wait
much.
to see you, David.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye.
Take care.